Welcome to the Focused and Fearless podcast, the show designed to explore how you can step into powerful self-leadership and stop settling for less in your life, business, health, and wealth. I'm your host, Heather Angel, and as a certified energy practitioner, coach, and online business consultant with over a decade of experience, you can expect expansive, honest, and enlightening conversations about what it really takes to create the changes in your life and business that right now may just feel completely out of reach. Thank you for choosing to invest in yourself by listening to this episode. Without further ado, let's dive in. Complete honesty, I didn't even know perimenopause was a thing before I met today's guest. However, Caroline Keatinge has absolutely blown my mind with how much of an impact perimenopause can have on us on a day-to-day basis. You're probably familiar with menopause and all the negative chat about it and the symptoms, but perimenopause can sneak up on you without you even realizing it. And it can really challenge you as you navigate this phase of life and try and run a business. Now, Caroline is a fully qualified nutritionist and takes a functional medicine approach to diving into the root cause of why women are experiencing these challenging symptoms during perimenopause. This interview honestly could have gone on for hours. I absolutely loved the wisdom that Caroline shares, and I really hope that you take a lot from it. There are links in the show notes to all the items that she mentions. So without further ado, I introduce you to Caroline. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so pleased to have you here.
I'm so pleased to see you, Heather, and be here. It's a real delight. Thank you for asking me.
I have wanted to have this because we've had so many conversations about different areas of the work that you do. And for so long, I was like, this is something that's got to be shared more widely because, as I said in the intro, your work, I think, is so valuable because we're going through such a big shift and have been for quite some years where women are working longer, they are forging out their own paths, they're creating businesses, we're doing more. Yet ultimately, we are still these natural beings that have this thing called menopause and perimenopause and stuff that happens to our bodies. And we're like, oh man, that's not on my timeline. Like, I've got an empire to build. And I think the more we can do to support women in all phases of life, the better. So I am genuinely thrilled. And I know just a second ago, I was like, we've just got to hit record because we're like talking about all this amazing stuff. So before we get into, how women can manage all these different things that are happening to them, can you first explain to me what is perimenopause?
So to explain perimenopause, it's probably best just to make sure we're clear on what menopause is. So menopause is actually just one day in your life. It's the 12-month anniversary. I don't know if you can say anniversary for months, but it's the anniversary of your last menstrual period. And so as we age, what happens as we age is we're born with a certain number of follicles in our ovaries, millions. And those kind of deteriorate over time. We actually ovulate a very small number of them. So they are constantly decreasing in number in our body over time. We ovulate a certain number of them. And then at some point, we stop producing eggs, we stop ovulating, we stop having a menstrual period. And so menopause is the end of menstruation. Perimenopause is basically an indeterminate period up to that day when it's 12 months since your last menstrual period. And it can vary for many women in terms of how long it is, the experiences you get through it. There isn't a switch. You're not suddenly not perimenopausal and then you are perimenopausal. For a lot of women, it's a gentle kind of shift over time. And that what happens is our just monthly cycle starts to change a little bit. It's not following the same kind of routine that it's followed for most women for months or years, when you're not pregnant. And those changes, you might have some months when you're not ovulating. You might have, what happens is that our normal hormone cycle with the rise and lowering of estrogen and progesterone gets a little off kilter, and that can cause an awful lot of symptoms. So perimenopause can take, really between kind of 2 and 10 years in terms of how long it goes.
Wow. But yeah, I had no idea it could be up to 10 years. My gosh.
No, if I look at myself, I'm 57 and I had my last period. Gosh, I should have looked it up, probably about 3 or 4 months ago. So I'm actually kind of right at the end of the spectrum. 52 is the the average age a Western woman tends to go through menopause. Obviously, you can be anything on a spectrum. But my periods, I had a period where I had 6 months without a period, I think when I was 50. And then they came back, which happens to a lot of women. You can not have them for a period and then they can come back. And so, but I had a lot of perimenopause symptoms at that time. So for me, it's probably been 7 or 8 years.
Wow. And what is the age range? Because like you said, there's no such thing as normal, is there? But what is the age range where people might usually start to experience the start or the start of perimenopause? Because I know we're going to talk about symptoms in a minute.
So I think it's quite hard to distinguish, because I think a lot of perimenopause symptoms, so a lot of women who experience estrogen dominant symptoms, so those are kind of, you might have very tender breasts, you might have bloating, you might have those kind of symptoms. Things like fibroids, endometriosis are all associated with estrogen dominance. So a lot of early perimenopause symptoms can also be estrogen dominance in nature, because if you don't ovulate, the first half of your cycle, you've got estrogen rising, and then as you ovulate, that causes estrogen to drop, and you get progesterone, which is formed by the ovary, the corpus luteum. So what's left after the egg is released in the ovary makes this wonderful hormone progesterone, which for lots of people makes you feel fantastic. So if that doesn't happen, then actually estrogen can rise and rise and rise. And so that's why you might have really bad PMS. You might have really, really, some perimenopausal women have really heavy periods, followed by maybe a really light period a little bit later. And it's all of this stuff going on. So for lots of women, I would say it's very typical if you're in your mid-40s, you're starting to experience changes in your PMS, changes in your period. You might not even have changes in your period, but you might have heightened anxiety. You might start to have some night flushes. You might have some joint pain or inflammation. You might have dry skin. It's a host of symptoms, but certainly if you're starting to see things and feel a bit different in your early mid-40s, perimenopause could be what's behind it. Even my first symptoms were heart palpitations and anxiety. Who would think that was perimenopause?
I know. And, I really want to sort of dive into some of these symptoms, because I think I saw you post that on Instagram or whenever it was about the heart palpitations. I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? Like, because I know I get that as a symptom when I'm anxious. And I was like, crikey, I never knew that was one to look out for. You just in my mind, menopause, I'm like, right, I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be sad. I'm going to get, I'm going to gain weight. I'm going to have the hot flushes. There are so many symptoms, which we're going to talk about now, which I hadn't even known were indications that, perimenopause might be starting. So what are the symptoms when people are coming to work with you, and you're sort of, from your own experience as well, what are those symptoms that may be going under the radar for a lot of women of the start of the perimenopause?
So I think exactly some of the things like heart palpitations, like anxiety, unexplained weight gain, suddenly feeling like, hang on a minute, body shape changes. You're finding that you're putting on weight around your midriff, whereas maybe that's not where you carried it before. You might find that your stress response is getting worse. So, another thing that I found is my kids I would go from 0 to 100 in the snap of a fingers, and I had to walk out the room, otherwise I would have ruined my relationship with my children. And I thought it was the kids were driving me wild. It took me a long time to realize that was me. So you're kind of, you mentioned mood management, stress, your whole HPA axis can go a bit off kilter. So hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal gland. So it can be some of those symptoms. Most people expect hot flushes, weight gain, they probably expect, but they wouldn't necessarily put anger management or mood issues down to, or heart palpitations. The number of women, I think, who go to their doctor who, and probably quite rightly, get checked out because they go with heart palpitations, but menopause isn't really on the spectrum.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And, I really, obviously being in the line of work that I do, the mental and emotional symptoms, this is something that I find fascinating, and I've been sort of doing some more reading just so I can help support my clients, because when you mentioned anxiety, I'm like, my gosh, I don't know if there's a person, let alone a woman, that I've spoken to over the last couple of years that isn't like, whoa, my anxiety is through the roof. We've had such a rough time of it. But I think that's really interesting, especially with the kids, because, if we're talking sort of, early 40s, mid 40s, then that is quite often when the kids are driving us slightly crazy, but actually being aware that it could be very much us that's perceiving it to be like that, because our hormones are doing all these new and wild and wacky things and creating this issue for us. So how do you start working with your clients when they're coming to you, and, especially with the mental side of things, because that must be quite a challenging thing to find out, because we have had such a horrendous couple of years, and things in the world as we're recording are very tense. So how do you sort of suggest women sort of have a look at that and think, well, actually, is this perimenopause? Is this something else? What do you advise them to do?
So what I'm going to do actually just before that is say I just realized a couple of other early symptoms people might not think about actually is things like joint pain and dry skin, and maybe a really dry, itchy scalp or something. So just to throw that into to the spectrum, because
that's another. Again, they're so. What strikes me for all of these ones is that they're so normal, if you like. Like, most women, that's a massive generalization, but a lot of us are doing our best to stay active, going to the gym and things like that. So it could be very easy to go, oh, I just probably push myself a bit too much at the gym. Yeah. That's why my joints are aching. Oh, I probably shower too much, or I need to change my moisturizer. That's why my skin's dry. So it's they're so incredibly subtle and so easy for us to go, oh, it's something else.
Yeah, no, I think yes, it is, and often it's not until you pull the whole picture together that you really get the look, the feel of it. So just to answer your question about how do I work with women? So because it's a spectrum, because there's so much going on, I really spend quite a lot of time just trying to understand where they're at. What are the main issues that are going on with them, and getting a feel for what is going on in their body and where they could be along this spectrum. You can do testing to kind of give you more insights into that, but you also just get quite a good picture from looking at the symptoms that people are experiencing. And then once we get a feel for that, there are just so many aspects that we can go to work on to give people support. So in terms of immediate support, there are some supplements, there are herbs, there are mushrooms, there are different kind of enzyme support that we can give our bodies to help manage those symptoms. So depending on where people are at and what their specific issue is, there are lots of different supplements that you can take, and they can really, really help in the here and now and make a transformational change, whilst then you go to actually working on some of the kind of deeper rooted issues to help kind of make some long-term foundational changes that are going to last into the future. There is some big hormonal changes that are going on as we go through this, because we are starting to, as we go through perimenopause, see big changes in, and then in menopause, see the loss of some of these big hormones, particularly estrogen and progesterone, that do play a major role in our body. And we can manage that transition in a few ways. We can kind of look at how we can support ourselves hormonally, but then look at all of the underlying processes that our bodies go through. And for lots of us, I kind of explain it a little bit like it's when you go to the beach and the tide is in, you just see, depending how windy it is, you just see the sea and the sand. And then as the tide goes out, you see all the rocks and the rock pools and everything else that's actually on the seabed that's always been there. What happens for a lot of us as we age and as these hormone levels drop is we just all of these things that are on the seabed that we've kind of been able to ignore for years are becoming more important. And so we need to address gut health. We need to address our kind of how metabolically active we are. So how do our bodies actually use the nutrients in the food that we put in? And that can really help us, if we look long term in terms of aging and things, just the more we can give our bodies the support it in terms of the flexibility and the way that it's able to take the nutrients in the food that we put in and use that to good effect. So that's a very complicated way of answering your question.
No, it's not. It's absolutely brilliant. And it's one of the main reasons that, I said in the intro that like as soon as I start getting symptoms, I'll be on the phone being like, right, book me in, because I'm all about prevention over cures. If we can do something to strengthen our body, and the seabed analogy is absolutely perfect. So what are the things, for people listening now that aren't, are very much like me, who aren't in that perimenopausal stage, but are very much like, well, let's prepare for this. Let's be aware, get the level of awareness that we need. What can women be doing to make sure that actually that seabed, that foundational level, is as strong as it can be?
Mm-hmm. So I think a couple of things that you can do, which are really helpful. One is, how much do you know your cycle? So really, really lean in to what's going on in your monthly cycle and kind of try and keep a diary. So even if you're kind of menstruating, if you're regular as clockwork, 28 days, keep a diary as to what symptoms you're experiencing, how you're feeling, how your energy levels are, what physical symptoms you might be experiencing, because that really gives you a real insight into how your body is operating kind of hormonally. And then as things start to change, you'll actually be able to pick up on those changes. And if you talk to somebody like me and you come with that information, we'll absolutely know kind of, you can tie it back a little bit to what's going on hormonally. So absolutely, number one is get to know your cycle as well as you possibly can. If you can layer on that kind of an understanding of how different foods affect you, so you start to layer up real knowledge and understanding of your body. So in fact, I went out with friends for a Thai dinner last night, and I came home and I was super, super, super bloated. I haven't felt like that for ages, painfully bloated. And I've just been thinking this morning, oh my God, what was in that food? I tried to eat quite cleanly because I like to, but there was something in there that really affected me. So the more you can keep a diary on that. So those are the first things you can do. And then one of the hormones that is so powerful in our body, and kind of our sensitivity to it can really change as we age, can change as we go through menopause, and it affects lots of the hormonal pathways, is insulin. So really working on managing your blood sugar, really dialing in to understanding kind of how your body is manufacturing insulin, how you're using it. So taking a lot of high processed carbohydrates out, really looking at your diet, making sure it's as much real food as you possibly can. And then the last thing you can do but not the last thing, but there are so many things you can do. Another thing you can really do is our gut. It's the largest organ in our body. It's where a lot of our immune system works, but it's also integral again to how we to the processing of our hormones, and how we kind of when hormones, as they go through your cycle, you need to get them out of your body. So estrogen, we excrete estrogen. It's a very complicated process. Estrogen is a fat-based. All of our sex hormones are formed. The root of them is an estrogen. I'm sorry, my brain's gone. It's basically fat. It's cholesterol at the root. And when we excrete them, you obviously poo or pee. So it's a water-based environment. So those hormones have got to be made into a water-soluble product, which involves the liver and the gut. And so the more you can do to support your gut and have really good gut health, again, that's going to really support you as you go forward.
God, it's amazing. Do you know, I knew this would happen. This interview could be hours long. There's so many areas we could talk about, but insulin, I had never even considered that. I mean, we hear about, the media and everything's very good at demonizing food groups and things. And sugar is definitely one of the favorite ones that they like to target. But I would never have even considered that as being one of the fundamental reasons for, managing our food, because again, I know that we love to demonize certain foods. So it's lots of like, don't eat gluten, don't eat this, don't eat that. Like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And I have joked, I'm like, one day someone's going to tell me broccoli is bad and I'm just going to cry in a pot in my house because I'm like, there's nothing left to eat. But that's really, really fascinating, and maybe something that no one else, certainly for me, that's a shocker. I hadn't really thought about that and the effect that it has on our, as a hormone. I never really think about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is interesting because if you look at the kind of hormonal pathways and the enzymes that help our body to kind of take one hormone and make it into something else, some of those are really upregulated and downregulated by nutrients, by things like insulin. So it does, it plays a big role. The other big thing that you can do is really looking at stress management as well, and just making sure that you really know and understand and have kind of really lean into ways of managing stress. But
and I think and we won't go into this, like I say, because otherwise we will be here for hours, but I've been doing a lot of reading about, stress and gut health. Again, like the gut health conversation is just such a huge one, isn't it? And I think, if we could focus on one thing, like if we could focus on the gut health, it has such huge implications to our mental health.
Oh, I mean, the gut-brain axis is, it's a two-way street. It goes up and it goes down. And I mean, who hasn't, kind of had an immediate response to a situation of high anxiety where you just get diarrhea? Oh my God, I got to go to the loo. That is the most obvious connection that there possibly could be between. Nothing else has gone on. This stuff in your brain has affected your stomach. And we'd be this is, I'm so passionate about all of this. My problem is you just have to tell me to stop talking because I rabbit on for hours.
Well, this is why we said we'll do perimenopause today, because I'm like, there's blatantly going to be other episodes where we talk about other areas. But I think that's really, really useful. And I want to sort of bring it into the workplace, if you like, because obviously most of my audience are business owners. And like I said at the beginning, age is just a number. We know that time is, a man-made construct, but equally on the flip reverse of that, we are natural beings and we have these cycles, and this is inevitable. If we are blessed with the ability to get to these ages, then this is going to happen, and it's about how we can work with it rather than sort of fighting against it. So there are a couple of things I want to ask you about, but certainly with you mentioned about knowing your cycle and sort of having that data. What can we do? Is there anything we can do with that sort of data to sort of look at our work life and kind of go, right, well, actually, this is the situation I'm in now. I can't work the same as I did when I was in my early 30s or my late 20s. What advice could you give to people on how they can best be efficient and show up and do all those things whilst going through these symptoms?
So I think when you're menstruating regularly and you really understand, we're all different. So different women will have kind of energy peaks and troughs at different points in their cycle. But for a lot of women, you know, when you're actually menstruating, you might want to, you might be less outgoing. You might want to kind of almost retreat into yourself and kind of, you know, some people call it winter. So you kind of want to cozy up. And then, you know, when estrogen's at its peak, when you're feeling flirtatious and, you know, because if you think about the peak time for actually, we're made to procreate. And so a lot of what drives us is that procreation. So when estrogen is at its peak just before ovulation, that's when you're feeling sassy and sexy and you want to go out and socialize and, you know, flirt a bit and, you know, obviously within the realms of what's appropriate for your personal situation. And so once you lean into that, and that's why when you do this, when you kind of really check out your cycle, really lean into how you're feeling energetically as well. And so if you are cycling regularly, use that, you know, don't make a really big presentation or a major board meeting or go out to new investors or, you know, really critical sales call. If you can avoid that during your, say, when you're menstruating, avoid it, if you can put it when you're going to be just before ovulation, when you're feeling really good, or lots of people in the second cycle, the first, just after ovulation, when progesterone is kind of at its high, that's a real, you know, feel-good hormone. So if you can lean in and then use that information, so maybe do more, you know, kind of desk-based work when you're in the winter periods, do more going out, you know, kind of seeing people in those other periods, that can really help you. The challenge when our cycle starts to really go off kilter is you might not be able to predict that because, you know, lots of women will go through, you might have a 6-week cycle and then a 2-week cycle. And then, so there it's a bit harder. So what I would say though, is if you've done this work up front and you kind of really know and understand where you're at cyclically, and then if you start putting tools in your toolbox, and so you know, if you talk to somebody like me, we can kind of talk through the different stages, what different support you need. And so then when you have times when you're feeling, you know, kind of really like retreating from the world, or you're really struggling with some, you know, maybe you're struggling with night sweats, or you're struggling with heightened anxiety, then there are some things you can do to support yourself. So there are some tweaks you can make to your food. There are some tweaks you can make to your lifestyle. There are some tools that you can call upon to help you manage those periods, so that you're not just kind of going in blind, going, oh shit, where did that come from? But you're kind of going, oh, this is happening, so this is what I need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really valuable, and I'm fortunate to still be very on a regular cycle. So, but for a good few years ago, I realized I was like, actually, I am never going to do, like, I know that I'm never going to do you know, big meetings on the week of my period, because I am exhausted. I'm like, no, can barely string a sentence together. So I know that at other times of the month, that's when I'm super creative. My brain can't help think of all these content ideas. And so I actually do all my content writing in batches, so that on those days where I'm like, I just want to stay in the duvet and drink tea, I can just literally copy and paste something I've written. I'm like, done. Yeah. It's all done. So I think that's really valuable. But you're right. It's having those tools as when things get a little bit, you know, like you said, off kilter, really, really valuable. And with, you know, obviously a lot of my audience are business owners, so we do have quite often that flexibility to make those, you know, choices. But for those that are in sort of, you know, the corporate world and they don't have that luxury, unfortunately, do you feel that we are moving to an era where society is seeing perimenopause and menopause, are being more aware of it? Are you seeing any sort of shifts in conversations around it, in people's beliefs around it? I mean, even within the women ourselves, I'd be interested to know, because I definitely still see a lot of stigma around it. But I'd be interested to know how you perceive, what's happening right now.
How long have we got? So I think, just to take a step back, I think something we need to do is, even in school age people, stop just thinking that, we're robots and we show up every day in the same way and we do stuff I've got 2 children going through exams this year, and I've got, a daughter and a son, and I look at my daughter and I think, gosh, that's hard. 2 years is weighing on 3 days when she's going to be examined. And if she happens to have, kind of really, she shouldn't have really bad PMT, by the way. If you have really bad PMT, that is common, but it's not normal. You can do a lot to have that. But if, she's going through something, we as society, we just assume that we're all, kind of robots and we can operate in that way. And I think there's a lot that we need to do to understand that actually we're not. If we look at menopause, I think the biggest real good news story is that menopause is being talked about. And I think that actually people are saying, oh God, yeah, this is something that women go through. So I think that is fantastic. But I think it's still being talked about as a problem. So it's kind of like, it's a problem that you, the woman, need to go and fix. I think some workplaces are becoming more aware of the challenges that some women can experience, and you certainly hear stories of a bit more workplace flexibility and kind of some recognition that maybe there may be some sometimes that women need more support. But the reality is, if you're in a high pressure corporate job, the risk of putting your head above the parapet, and it's the same for mental health, it's still, both of these are talked about, they're recognized, but not many women in really senior positions are going to want to put their head above the parapet, because I think it's still seen as a weakness, maybe the wrong word, but you're not going to be as good as your male equivalent if you can't kind of just ignore it. So I think it's great we're talking about it, but I think so much more needs to be done this isn't a medical problem that women have that they need to fix. There's so much, yes, we can do to manage this transition and to really help us flourish through it. But we still, kind of need to work through it and need support.
Yeah, absolutely. And we won't go into this because this could be a whole other podcast, but I do think you're so right that we are seen as robots. And I think equally for men as well, they're still expected to show up and, if you're having a bad day, tough, and I think you're right. Unfortunately, I do think people still see it as weakness when actually we're told to be vulnerable, but it very much in a way that's acceptable and doesn't actually impact anybody else. So, yeah. It's a challenge. And I think that happens, especially for women all the way through, I would never have thought to ring up, even if I was feeling awful, I would never have rung up my employer and go, I can't come in today because actually I've got a really bad period. I would be like, well, that's not a good enough reason. Like if I've got horrendous flu, that's fine. If I've broken my leg, that's fine. But I could certainly not have, I didn't feel like I could have rung up and gone, actually, this is happening today and I'm really not feeling very well. You just have to, we're conditioned to be like, well, you just get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, women are, and, pregnancy. I mean, I remember thinking, God, if men went through this pregnancy, most men would go off sick for, 3 months.
I know. And it's a fascinating conversation and one that I definitely want to have on this podcast about, how we are conditioned to just keep going and be robots. And, it isn't natural and it isn't healthy at all. But I think one thing I would like to sort of look at is when you said about sort of managing the symptoms and sort of doing what we can to manage this. Are there, I know there's like a million different dietary things that can do, and it's very individual for women, but is there anything that women could do now that I recognize some of these symptoms she's mentioned, and actually I do still need to keep going every day? Are there particular foods or supplements or something that they could maybe go out now and kind of go, right, well, I'll just start increasing this or decreasing this? And the second part of this question, the reason I'm asking this is I've had two friends who just did a bit of Googling. One of them, but they both read you need soy. They both drank tons of it. One of them was like, oh my God, it's the cure-all. I feel amazing. The other one was like, oh my God, I feel horrendous. I've got too much of it now. So I would love if there's some things that you could suggest so that people like my friends don't kind of go, oh crikey, Google told me it would be this. And it's actually messed me up even worse.
Yes, I think in perimenopause, part of the challenge is you could, as I talked a bit about estrogen dominance, you could be in a position of having, in perimenopause, our estrogen levels can really, really rise to be significantly higher than is normal. And the reason people talk about soy in menopause is because soy is one of the most well-known phytoestrogens. So that is, or it's not a phytoestrogen, it's a food that has phytoestrogenic properties. As a friend of mine corrected me when I once talked about it as a phytoestrogen. We call them phytoestrogens just for short.
Yeah.
So there are a whole group of foods which have chemical structures which are similar to estrogens. And one of the reasons estrogen plays such a huge role in our body is we have these estrogen receptors. We have them, in our brains, in our bones, in our breath. We have them all throughout our body. And estrogen kind of locks into these receptors and causes a kind of causes a reaction, causes messages to occur. And foods that have phytoestrogen or phytoestrogenic properties can kind of connect into those estrogen receptors. So if your estrogen levels are very low, it can give you, it acts like a weak estrogen. It's not as strong as estrogen, but it can kind of interact with those estrogen receptors and can really help. So if you are struggling with things like kind of dry skin, if you're really struggling with brain fog, can be high estrogen as well, but possibly brain fog, anxiety, some of those hot flushes, night sweats, some of those things, maybe soy can help you. You really want to try and have it in as unprocessed a form as possible. So edamame beans, you can have tofu, but don't go for, I would, if so many of the soy yogurts, if you look down the list of ingredients, they're just stuffed with, kind of other fillers and things. So try and have it in as pure form as possible. But some of the things that we can all do, no matter where you are on the spectrum, one of the minerals that is key to so many different enzyme reactions in our body is magnesium. And because magnesium comes from the soil, because of our farming practices, etc., where there's just most foods have much lower levels of magnesium, and you might not eat the foods that are higher naturally in magnesium anyway. So a magnesium supplement is really helpful. One of the problems with all minerals is actually absorbing them, is getting them into our body, because they can actually bind with other compounds actually in your gut. So if you take a magnesium supplement, it's not guaranteed to get through your gut wall into your blood. You might actually just be paying a lot of money to poop it out the other end. Oh. So if you don't have very good kind of gut health, one of the ways to get magnesium is transdermally. So you can take a spray. So a company called Better You, you can get a cream or an oil, and you can kind of spray it on your body. It can tingle, which is kind of an indication that your body kind of needs it. It's kind of sucking in, but transdermally can be a way. And then if you take it orally, there are very different, the kind of mineral has to be attached to another compound to make it in a stable form. And so you can absorb it. So you can take some supplements as well. My brain has just gone as to the form that I most prefer. I'd have to think about it if I get
it. Okay. Well, we can certainly all link that up in the show notes.
Yes. Glutamate, magnesium. No, it's not glutamate. I'll have to. So magnesium is really important. The other thing to really think about is in terms of our diet, we talked a bit about insulin. So trying to switch away from processed foods and trying to replace them with real foods. And because we cycle through a whole day, and insulin is one of those things that it can cause cravings, it can really throw us off kilter. So what's really important is the first meal of the day, because that kind of sets, it almost determines if you're going to get on a roller coaster or not. So if your first meal of the day is the kind of classic, even if it's Weetabix, piece of toast and marmalade and a milky coffee. So what you've got there is you've got some pretty easily digested carbohydrate, not an awful lot of protein. There's a bit of protein, in the wheat. But you've got a very high processed, high carbohydrate diet, which is going to kind of get you on this insulin roller coaster. So if you can shift over to kind of eggs, to a higher protein, higher fat-based breakfast, that can really kind of help to set you up. Yeah. And that can be really important. The other supplement that I think is kind of universally we're often deficient in is omega-3. Those lovely fats that you get in fish, in oily fish. What is really, really important there is the quality of the supplement that you take, because all unsaturated fats are by their nature unstable, which means that they can become kind of oxidized, and that, in fact, is kind of almost worse for you. You're putting an inflammatory food into your body. So you need a really high quality supplement, or just increase, have oily fish 2 or 3 times a week.
It's incredible. And as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, this morning I scoffed a crumpet and drank a massive coffee. And I'm like, no wonder I'm sat here thinking, God, I'm hungry. And it's so different on the days when I have, scrambled eggs and salmon and smoked mackerel. Like, I don't feel like that afterwards. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because even sometimes with the knowledge, life gets so busy. So that's really, really fascinating. And the magnesium, just talking about having it on a spray, I think that's another. I have a cupboard full of all kinds of supplements. I take all kinds of things, and it does make me realize, I'm like, are they even getting through? Are they doing the things that I'm, like you said, spending all this money on? So that's fascinating. So thank you very much. And we will, I'll tag in the show notes which version of magnesium that you mentioned for people to have a look at. So that's really useful. And I don't think we could have this conversation without touching on HRT, because I do feel, certainly from someone on my perspective and a lot of the people I work with, we are very much like, be as natural as possible, eat well, look after yourselves, all this kind of thing. And HRT has almost become this really divisive conversation, almost something that's being judged. You're judged for taking it, you're judged not for taking it. And I think it's interesting what you said at the beginning about the menopause being seen as this like medical issue, this health problem. So where do you stand? What sort of things would you say to women who, just really don't know what HRT is all about, or whether it should be something that they should be considering?
I think it's very much an individual choice. I think what women shouldn't feel is it's HRT or nothing. And I think HRT obviously plays a really essential role. Some women, kind of life becomes utterly intolerable, and it's a lifesaver for them. What I would say is there is a kind of body of conversation out there which does talk about menopause as estrogen deficient, and kind of says estrogen is an important hormone that we need in our bodies to be able to operate normally. If you as a woman are going through menopause in your mid-late 40s, for a lot of us, our lifespan is going to be, 90s plus. So we potentially have the longest period of our life is going to be postmenopausal. You might have 50 years postmenopausal, which will be, kind of a multiple of your years that you've been menstruating. And so I don't buy into this theory that we are estrogen deficient for 50 years. We are, yes, we're operating in a very different hormonal situation, but, I have, I know lots of elderly women who are as bright as buttons, who, kind of get by without estrogen. So I think for lots of women, HRT is an essential tool. It really helps them. But I think also lots of women haven't been able to and looked at other alternatives. So I think it needs to be an individual choice. The other thing I would say is one of the most important things, I think if you do choose to take HRT, what you do need to do is all this other work that we've kind of talked about in terms of gut health. We haven't really talked about the kind of hormonal pathways, but if you're putting if you're putting an external hormone into your body, it's even more important that you know the pathways that your body needs to go through to process that hormone. And ultimately, we did talk a little bit about translating this hormone into a water-soluble structure so that you can excrete it. It's obviously even more important if you're putting something externally into your body that those pathways are really working for you. Mm-hmm. And so I think along with doing HRT, it's really worthwhile doing some deep work in terms of making sure that all of those pathways are as efficient as they can be. And that can help you as well because, lots of people think HRT is just this wonder drug, but I do speak to lots of women for whom it's not been that. It's not worked in that way, or it's worked for 6 months and then it stopped working. So I think by all means, look at it as part of your approach. It might be something that you really need, but don't ignore all the other work is maybe the wrong word, but all the other support actions that you can take to help your body through this process.
Yeah. And, I think the most important thing is it is the woman's choice, but I do wonder, and you touched on it there a little bit, whether they know that there's a choice. They go to the doctor and say, here are my symptoms. They're like, oh, doctors are great. I'm not going against what the GPs are doing. But they're like, right, oh, it's menopause. Here's the solution, HRT. Off you pop. Take a pill for 10 years and you'll be all right.
Yeah. So. And I think most doctors, it's this whole situation of one of the reasons I went into Nutritionist, because it's such an interesting science. It's, we've been eating since humans existed. But I think it's a really young science because we're still learning so much about our bodies, how our bodies work, how they operate, how to really support them and help them, particularly in this environment when, as beings, we have not evolved that much since we were cavemen, but our whole environment, what we eat, what we do, the lifestyle we live, all of the pressures that we get, those have evolved completely, and those really influence us. So obviously a doctor is very restricted by kind of NICE and by the practice that they work in terms of what advice they can give. And you will have doctors say that alternative therapies, in quotes, are untried, untrusted, and don't work. And it is true that there is less research in a lot of alternative therapies, frankly, because there's a lot less money in it. And the research goes where the money is, and the money goes where the profit is. Mm-hmm. So, but there is research in it. And there is also research that really shows how it benefits you. Just to take one example of why it might change as well, why one thing that works for somebody might not work for somebody else. If we take if we take soy that we talked about before, so, and I said soy has phytoestrogenic properties. Actually, soy doesn't. What it is, it's the result of your digestion that actually is the actual compounds that have these benefits. So it's not the food itself. It's once it's been through your digestive system, once the bacteria in your gut have kind of chewed it up, and then the product of that the bacteria poo, if you want, is this compound that has estrogenic properties. Because all our guts are different, the microbiome makeup of your gut is different from my gut. So not everybody is in a position to actually make those compounds. And so two people can eat soy and trying to address exactly the same product. One person would go, yippity, night sweat's gone, I'm feeling amazing. The other person would say, frankly, it didn't really do much for me. And those can both be completely true. And it's because actually the difference between these two people is their gut environment. So it is a little bit of a case that sometimes it can take a bit longer to find what's going to work for you. You have to work through different things. There are supplements, you can actually take supplements that have these compounds in their active form. So, you actually take the phytoestrogen, if you will, in its form that can help. I've got so far off, I can't remember the question, but I think it's a case that doctors, some doctors are more enlightened than others, but some doctors are very dismissive of alternative therapies. And to my mind, some of it is they don't have the time and the bandwidth to go down that, and they can't prescribe it anyway. If you do go to a doctor, historically, doctors have also prescribed a lot of antidepressants. And one of the reasons that could be is one of the things that can happen in menopause is we become less good at kind of manufacturing serotonin. And so that's one of the reasons that antidepressants can help some menopausal symptoms. The doctor, I would always recommend talking to somebody else, somebody like me, who can provide some of the information that a doctor doesn't provide to help you make the decision that's right for you.
Absolutely. And I think everything you just said is so fascinating, and it just really highlights again, doesn't it, the gut health point in sort of just taking really good care of ourselves. And I just think it is, I've been to the doctor many years ago now, and luckily he was very, very lovely and was like, you could have antidepressants. I was going through a bit of a bad time, or there are other things. And he was very up to speed or he was a younger doctor and very up to speed on all these alternatives. He's like, how about, it's entirely your choice, but there are other options before we go down the pill route. And I do feel that unfortunately some people go into a doctor's surgery and they're like, oh, there's a symptom, this is a drug for it, great, tick. And, again, not the doctor's fault. They have like 5 minutes to see all these patients. So, I think it's really important for women to take back that power and know that actually what they're experiencing is valid. And yes, a prescribed medication may be the option, but there are so many other options out there for them. And to touch on your point as well, yes, they might not have this scientific backing, but as you said, that's not where the money goes. Money is in pharmaceuticals. Money is following the profit. So if they could package up, Reiki in a pill, if they could package up, all the wisdom that you've got in like, oh, okay, well, here's a nutritional best thing you can do and it's in a pill, then it would happen. But they can't.
Yeah. I mean, I would, there is quite a lot of scientific evidence out there, but it's in no means the kind of volume and the quantity that is behind, all these drugs, because Yeah. And, again, going on to that point of empowering people, I really would encourage women to speak to someone like you if they feel there's other things they can be doing, but also, for me, I use lots of different alternative theories. I use homeopathy for various things. And there is plenty of stuff out there that says it's rubbish, it doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, actually, my lived experience and my evidence is it's flipping amazing and it's done all kinds of wonderful things. So I think really for anyone listening to this,
what works for you, and that's okay. And like Caroline said, it's different, isn't it? Depending on who we are, what our gut biome is, what lifestyle we're living as well. It's very, very different. It's been so fascinating. I was just sort of thinking, I was like, oh, there's so many other things I want to talk about, but I'm already taking up over an hour of your time. So to wrap up, is there anything that you would like to share? Is there anything that we haven't covered in this conversation that you really want to make sure women know or have in their sort of toolkit to be able to manage this sort of perimenopause part of their life?
I think the only thing that we haven't really talked about, well, not the only thing, but one thing we haven't really talked, and I feel like I should apologize for giving such long answers to everything you ask and tangenting off a bit. But one thing we haven't really talked about is in the way we approach it. If you look on Facebook groups, if you look in the press, menopause it's kind of viewed as a negative, as a real downer, as, this horrific thing you've got to go through. And I think if you said to, lots of 25-year-old women, wouldn't you like to just get rid of your periods? Wouldn't you like to get rid of, all that faff you've got? Even if you don't have any PMT or PMS or period pains or anything, wouldn't you just like to get rid of, the nasty having to carry tampons around, and have you got something? And so there's a whole approach to menopause that I think we ignore, which is it's a stage in our life that we're going through. For most of us, the bit we're moving to will be the longest period in our lives. 60 is the new 40. And I think for lots of us as well, if you take it into the bigger spectrum, lots of us are coming to this when our opportunities and our horizons can really change. Our children are getting older, or depending when you had kids, of fleeing the nest. Yes, you might have caring responsibilities for your parents or your parents' generation, but it is a time when, for so many of us, we've been so focused on everyone around us and making sure that we're looking after everyone. And it can be a time to actually say, well, hang on a minute. I read this great book on I can't remember the name of it, but by Camilla Cavendish, looking at all the extra years. And one of the things she said that really resonated with me, rather than look at your age, look at how much time you have left. So rather than say I'm 60, which for lots of people, you start to think of getting a blue rinse and being a granny, just say I've got 30 years. So somebody who's 20, what do they think they can achieve by the time they're 50? And yes, you might not want to be achieving the same thing, but you have a lot of life to fill. I keep meaning to triple check this, but Chinese call menopause a second spring. And I think, yes, there are, for some women, it can be really difficult, and there can be challenging times to kind of learn to manage. But I would say there are absolutely ways of managing those. There are multiple ways of approaching it and managing it. If you don't want to, you don't have to go on HRT. You can really survive this, more than thrive through this. But then also, let's use this as a springboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really pleased you touched on that, actually, because I'm 100% in that. I'm like, right, well, as soon as I was done with children, I'm like, well, menopause is welcome, because I'm done. My body's done its thing. And you're absolutely right. And I think very much the clients that sort of I work with, they are in their 30s and 40s. This is when they're starting life, if you like, because they're like, oh my gosh, I've had this amazing idea of a business. I'm starting this thing. So actually, there are a lot of women forging, in my opinion, kind of the most exciting part of their life, where they have that freedom, they have that independence. Their kids are a little bit more independent, so they can do that thing that they want to do. And it happens at the same time when society's going, oh, but hang on, there's this awful thing you've got to go through, and that's it, that's the end of you. And it's like, no, we can flourish and we can be, vibrant and bright and live our lives fully, just because we're going through this, going to have the menopause. And exactly like you said, we've got all these years afterwards.
And the wisdom that you're bringing, in your 40s, the wisdom you've got to bring to the table. It really opens up new opportunities, new horizons.
Absolutely. And as I turned 40 this year, and so many of my friends are like, oh my God, I'm 40, that's an awful thing. I'm like, it's great. The older I get, the less F's I give. I'm like, I am happier that every year older I get, I'm like, oh, new layers of wisdom, new layers of awareness, new layers of, like I said, just not caring about, others' opinions and things like that. So for me, you said, 60 is a new 40. I'm like, bring it on. Heaven help the world when I get to 60, because I'll be just like, really don't care. So I think it's a beautiful conversation. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of share before we
I think if we open anything else up, we'll be here for another half hour. So
we will say to be continued. So Caroline, how can people find you, read more about your work?
So they can find me on Instagram at Caroline Keatinge with an E, Keatinge. Or my website is www.carolinekeatinge.com. Again, Keatinge. Those are probably the places or they can email me, Caroline@carolinekeatinge.com.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, I will link all that up in the show notes, but, I'm not one to promote people being on social media, especially Instagram, because it's a bit of a black hole. However, your content is amazing. And I've read so many things, even, knowing you for so long, there's stuff you share on Instagram. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. And I save it. And I'm like, right, I'll put this in my little menopause bank of information that I'll need. So I do encourage people to go and connect with you on Instagram, because it is really, really valuable. Thank you so much for all of your time that you've given today. So much valuable information. And I think what you're doing is so important. We really do need to empower women to have that knowledge, to know that actually food, I've said for ages, food is medicine. It can heal, it can change so much for you. So I really hope anyone that's sort of listening to this going, oh yeah, I'm dealing with these issues, reaches out to you, because I think you're amazing. I think the work you do is incredible.
Well, it's been such, there's nothing I like more than talking about this stuff. So it's been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, my lovely. And as I said, this is most likely not goodbye, more of a to be continued. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, any resources and links mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would kindly share, subscribe, and leave a positive review so that the podcast can help and reach as many people as possible. Thank you again for listening. Have a gorgeous day, and I'll see you in the next episode.